Good afternoon, everybody. We're going to give a shot at chapter 4 in my book, A Spiritual Soul Book. www.aspiritualsoulbook.com. Pick up a copy, get yourself a Kindle copy so that you could read the chapters on your phone whenever you're waiting in line at the bank or at Walmart or at Lord & Taylor or at Bloomingdale's, whichever ones are still open. Get it on Kindle, or you can get a hard copy when you're sitting back and relaxing and you want to read something that's inspiring and that will fill up your mind and your life with something that is elevating and positive. Talking about filling up the mind, let's get to it. Today, chapter 4 is thought versus speech and action. So until now, we were talking about the garments of the soul. There's the soul itself. There is the energy of life itself. There is the sense of me, I. And that sense of me, that sense of I, expresses itself through three garments: thought, speech, and action. The way you act is external to yourself. The way you speak, it's something that you decided to do, and it's external to yourself. And thought is internal. It's inside yourself, and it's the way you decide to communicate with yourself, and as a result, it's going to trickle its way, and it's going to influence how you decide. There are tools that it uses in order to express itself and fulfill its purpose and mission here in this world. And that is why, as a matter of fact, the overwhelming majority of commandments are connected to the way we use our garments. Very, very few commandments are connected to the soul itself. The overwhelming majority of commandments are telling us to do or not to do within the realm of our garments. Don't think bad thoughts. Think positive thoughts. Speak only good words. Don't speak bad words. Do the right thing. Keep the Shabbat. Do and don't go to places that are bad. Very few commandments, and these are the more difficult ones, because these are commandments that God is telling us directly to make a positive improvement on the soul itself. That portion of God, my identity, and the Maimonides says that's the ultimate goal of living and of all the commandments, that they should make a positive improvement on the soul itself, on the identity of me. So, for example, one of the commandments that are on the soul itself is to know God. Not to think about God, but to actually know God. I become a person who knows God. Not that I'm thinking about God. You know, there's the famous story of, I think it was with the Alter Rebbe, when he came back from a long time at his teacher, the Mizritcha Magid. So he was asked, what did you learn when you were at your teacher? And he answered, I learned that there is a God. So he was ridiculed. And right away, one of the Gentile maids were called in, and she was asked, do you believe in a God? Do you know that there is a God? And she answered, absolutely. So the fellow looked at the Alter Rebbe in jest. What are you talking about? Is that why you went there and spent so much time? And the Alter Rebbe answered, and he said, she says she knows God and believes in God, but I know that there is a God. And that's the huge, big difference that takes an entire, sometimes lifetime to work on it. That we should actually decide myself, that I can lose and I can sometimes get weak about it. And then the same thing is also with love. That is a commandment of the soul itself, to love God. Yes, you do certain things on the outside that will impact my soul and mold it, that eventually it should love God. But when I become a person that is loving of God, that's me. It's not something that is outside of me anymore. It's not something that I could lose, because it became who I am right now. A person that loves God, person that fears God, that respects God. So those are commandments of the soul. The energy that is me is shaped in such a way that it now knows God, it now loves God, it now respects God. But those are very few of the commandments in the Bible. The overwhelming majority of the commandments all relate so to that part that can be put, or it could be ignored and not connected with. And in those three garments of thought, speech, and action, there is a huge difference between the garment of thought and the garment of speech and action. And let's deal with that now in chapter 4. Garments are put on and taken off at will. Garments affect the way we feel. And garments tell people who we are. And we already addressed those 2 points in the earlier chapters. That the garments, they can work on the outside and affect the way we actually feel. And it's also many times an expression of who we are. Because when I decide to wear a certain type of garment, that's a message that is being communicated with people, what I am thinking, what I'm feeling at that time. Every soul has three garments: thought, speech, and action. One immediate distinction between the garment of thought versus the garment of speech and action is that speech and action, because they are external, being on the outside, they can sometimes receive influence from external people, and a person to speak and act in ways that are not consistent with one's internal beliefs. Because speech and action are external to my body, to my soul, so therefore they allowed themselves to be placed on me from external forces. Just like, for example, a person can throw on me, he can throw on me a blanket. He can throw on me and spray on me something dirty or something that smells beautiful, perfume. So because it's something on the outside and external, it can be influenced on me from the outside. Thoughts, since they are totally internal, they are in myself, within myself, to myself. They are always entirely the results of our own choice. That's powerful stuff, my friends. Your thoughts are always going to be the result. You heard that beep beep? UPS. I'm not going. I don't want to mess up this recording. When it comes to thoughts, since they are entirely internal, so therefore they are the results of our own choice. Nobody can take the blame or the credit. Sure, you can be inspired or triggered, but nobody can put it on you because it's inside yourself. And therefore, you have total and complete responsibility and control over the thoughts that you have within yourself. And nobody has that power to cause you to think in a way that you don't want to think. We're going to develop that as we go on here now in this chapter. Something else differentiates the garment of thought from the garment of speech and action. Speech and action are not constant garments. A person can easily put them on or take them off. A time to speak and a time to stay quiet. A time to act and a time not to act. Those are the words from King Solomon. And he only uses those descriptions. Speaking. Thought, on the other hand, is always flowing. There's no time to think. It's always thinking. your soul, the energy of your identity, of your life, because it is permanently attached to this garment of thought. As long as it's vibrating, the thought is also vibrating. A person can never stop thinking. This garment is glued to his soul, and this garment a person can never take off as he can the other garments of his soul. So that's another very, very important distinction that puts the garment of thought on a level of its own. Thoughts are sometimes compared to a ceaseless and flowing river. Even while sleeping, during that time, when a person is not speaking or acting, his mind is still working and his thoughts are still flowing. And that is where a permanent garment on the soul, on the energy of life itself. When a person is sleeping, they're still alive. And since their energy of the soul is still fluttering, their thoughts is also going to be fluttering. Now, it's true that when a person is sleeping, he's on another different plane. It's not the same conscious level as when you are awake. There are different boundaries that the soul expresses itself when it is asleep versus when it is awake. And that's why you have all kinds of dreams that are sometimes ridiculous, impossible, and sometimes they are inspired by godly inspirations. But there's something pretty long as the soul is alive, it is always attached to this tool of the thoughts as a way for it to express itself to itself and within our own selves. Although thoughts are always flowing and cannot be stopped, a person can decide what should flow in his mind: clean, pure water, or muddy water. Even though a person is not in control of the flow of his thoughts, he can decide what the content of that flow should be. So it's like a channel that's always streaming. And it's always streaming. Now, it's the stream of those thoughts, as I'm going to point out in the next paragraph, is influenced by your soul, by who you are. And if you don't make a conscientious effort what to think, so then it's just going to work on its own as an expression of who you are. But if you decide to go and input that flow with a specific kind of a thought, which only you could do inside yourself, since, as we said before, the garment of thought is attached to the soul and it's one with the soul itself inside the person. So you can decide what the content of that flow should be. Only you can decide what the content of that flow should be. There was a famous mashpia, a spiritual mentor in Chabad, and he said, I think his name was, anyway, so he said that, I'm always amazed at anybody that would consider to excuse themselves for having unwarranted thoughts. He would say, B'meila, I can understand that a person is influenced by somebody else and forced or somehow pushed to say certain things that they didn't want to do or didn't want to say. I understand where a person can be forced to do something which they don't want to do or don't want to be said. I can get it that there comes a point where that could happen. But when it comes to thoughts, since thoughts are entirely internal and completely up to the person themselves, it's one with the energy of the soul. How could anybody ever blame somebody else for the thoughts that you have in your own head? How could you allow for thoughts, for the procession of what you're thinking on anybody else? The soul either attracts and sucks up thought like a vacuum from what is in the atmosphere and what we have trained the soul to think in the past, or else we may conscientiously place the thoughts we choose upon the soul. Since the garment of thought is attached to the energy of the soul, these are very powerful ideas that Hasidus and Kabbalah is revealing to us. And this is the way it is. The truth of the matter, that when it comes to how you think and what you think, you are entirely in control of those thoughts. It's working all the time. It is going to be alive at every single moment, that tool. It's either going to be expressing subconsciously or unconsciously what you've already developed your soul to be, or you can decide through your soul, through another element of your soul, the free choice within your soul, what exactly that current and that flow should contain within itself. These are very, very powerful and empowering awareness and ideas that we should know, especially as we continue on to discuss that when it comes down to it, everything about yourself is in your head. Understanding how these things operate and the input and the control that we have over those things, as the saying goes, knowledge is power. This is incredible, powerful stuff to know and to have this knowledge. The only way a person gains control over his thoughts is by inserting into this current of energy what he does wish to think. To ignore the conscious effort necessary to decide what to think allows for random thoughts and the random results that come as a result of not taking control. So when you decide what to think and you are fully on top of it, you're going to have exactly what you're thinking about. But if you for a moment stay quiet and pull back and just allow your mind to run wild, it's going to pick up what already has been the influence on the soul of the past. And as we're going to discuss later on, and as we've already discussed in the first two chapters, these garments that we place upon ourselves, they have an impact on us, on our actual intellect, and on our actual emotion, on who we are. So when you decide to talk words that are negative or destructive, it's going to have that impact on you. Just like if you put on dirty and smelly clothing. If you decide to use your word to talk positive and upbeat words, that's in the garment of speech, then it's going to have that kind of an impact on you backwards. Same thing is also with deeds. The way you behave and where you go and what you do is going to have an impact on you, or it's an expression of what you decided to do, which then feeds onto itself into a loop kind of a way, which one thing brings to the next. As their sages tell us of the ethics of our fathers, a good deed brings to a good deed, and God forbid the opposite. So when it comes to thought, if you don't conscientiously decide to think certain thoughts, what you've already molded your soul to be is what the thought is going to pick up. And so that means ultimately you are responsible for the kind of thoughts that you have. A person can distract himself from unwanted thoughts by conscientiously inserting different, preferable, and supportive thoughts. By inserting what he wants to think, chosen according to his true wishes, and what he really wants to think, and the degree of his commitment to chase away his current thoughts, a person will succeed in driving away what is presently there. And here is the last paragraph of chapter 4. This power to control the garments, and thought in particular, will ultimately determine how our soul and in powerful last paragraph. So, knowing that these different tools are totally up to us to decide when and how to put upon ourselves, gives us the awareness that it's all up to us, and eventually it becomes who we are, and therefore ultimately who we are is to our credit, or God forbid the opposite. Okay, anybody that's in this group, the group of A Spiritual Soul Book page, you're welcome to discuss, to ask, and I will try to do my best to give answers. So until we get to chapter 5, which I'm going to try to do in another, today's Monday, so let's give it a little break, and maybe on Thursday I'm going to do chapter 5.